You're not crazy. That is really what I want to emphasize. You're not crazy. This is not you. And please seek help if you can, because it'll help you become butterfly, go from the caterpillar to the butterfly. It is possible.
Hi, everyone. Christopher Bruce with the Bruce Law Firm. I'm excited today to get into my interview with Sara Walsh from the Wellness Counseling Group. The talk is gaslighting. We're going all into what is it? What are the red flags of gaslighting? How does it manifest in relationships? How does it affect somebody? And what do you do if you're somebody that recognizes that you're being gaslit, you're being abused in your relationship? What are your first steps for processing this and getting help, possibly ending the relationship or trying to stop the gaslighting? What do you do? Sara and I are going to cover all of that. It's going to be great. I hope you enjoy it. So, Sara, can you explain, everyday terms, what is gaslighting and why is it such a powerful form of manipulation?
So thanks for asking that. Gaslighting is a form of emotional abuse. And it is a way to create self-doubt and have a victim question their reality. So the term gaslighting was coined by the 1944 film starring Ingrid Bergman called Gaslight. And in this film, she is married and the husband dims the gas lights in their apartment. And when she questions him about it, he says, "I don't know what you're talking about. The gas lights are not dim." And so which is a direct attempt to make her think that she's crazy and question her reality and judgment. And so that's really what gaslighting is.
And I can tell you, the first time I heard the word, I was doing a consultation and I was kind of like, oh yeah, gaslighting, of course. And I circled it on my legal pad to go look it up later. And I saw that, but then it just really, really clicked. Like so many of my clients have dealt with that in relationships that are just toxic or unhealthy. And maybe you could explain gaslighting. What are some common everyday examples? Help people understand how this shows up in a relationship.
Sure. So gaslighting shows up in abusive relationships in many ways. I guess the first one is really denying reality. So an example of that would be the abuser saying, "That never happened. I don't know what you're talking about." So we'll use husband and wife examples here. So let's say the wife says, "Do you remember that you said this or that, or such and such happened?" And then he says, "I don't know what you're talking about. That never happened."
I've seen that with affairs. That never happened. What are you talking about? And it's like there's personal or private investigator footage of it. It's kind of insane.
That is exactly right. As a matter of fact, that is a very common theme that I see in these relationships where the woman will say, "What is this text message? What is this email? Who is this person?" Like they were caught and they, at that point, even deny, "That's not me. That didn't happen." Another way this shows up is when they're denying the person's reality. They'll say, "You're crazy. You don't know what you're talking about." So really minimizing their feelings or saying, "This is nothing." Using our example, "This is nothing. This is not an affair. You're reading into this. You're too sensitive. You don't know what you're talking about." So I want you to imagine if you're in a relationship, and we need to remember, these relationships were built on love and trust. So this happens subtly and it happens gradually. And so these women, they love their husbands. And I will say that this does happen where the woman is the abuser as well.
Absolutely.
I think it's important to say that. But in terms of our conversation, we'll say the woman is the victim here. So over time, when this is happening, the woman begins to really question her judgment. She begins to question her decision-making and her sense of reality, which then erodes her self-esteem and just really is very damaging. So in other ways that it shows up is like rewriting his history, which is where there'll be a situation or a scenario, and the woman's perception of that scenario is completely different than the husband's. It's like they rewrote history. if you find yourself asking, am I living in a different world here? Am I not, my perception of what is happening within this relationship and within our life is so different than his. That is an example of how it shows up in everyday life. Minimizing and blaming. Well, I wouldn't have had to yell. I wouldn't have had to do X, Y, and Z if you wouldn't have behaved in a certain way.
Yeah.
You know, a gaslighter and an abuser is never going to take responsibility for their actions. So you're caught in this cycle of, hey, this is happening. Why are you doing this? What's happening? And you never, and you have a husband who's not willing to admit to anything. Okay. And so it just creates a lot of confusion and havoc with someone's mental health.
You know, I can just tell you, and I feel very lucky with my relationship. My law partner is my wife, and we happen to have a lot of fun together. But I'll tell you just from my own experience of dealing with a couple of other divorce lawyers in town, maybe one or two to where I eventually represented their spouse and learned a little bit more about the person. A couple of these people, they just had me, without knowing it, especially earlier in my career, I'd be like, what is going on here? This story I'm getting is so different than what I think happened, and it caused me to question myself, like, am I doing the right thing? This person is telling me like I'm terrible, or with lawyers, you're unethical, or, you know, like you should get reported to the bar, you know, committee or whatever. And it just really like made me question it till I learned more about this stuff. And I mean, it does happen in other work relationships and stuff like that too. It's real.
It is real. If you think about this, you might be able to identify, oh, I had a boss who did this to me, and parent. So a lot of parents as well, really, you know, so it's very common. And once you see it, it's hard not to not see it, which is part of the recovery process. One thing I would like to add to how this shows up is a gaslighter and abuser will discredit the victim in public. So you might, so like when they're socializing, when they're out, and with lawyers and other professionals, saying she's having memory problems. She's losing her mind. So this takes away their credibility, and it also isolates them and gives him more power and control, which is really essentially the ultimate goal here.
I feel like I know there's patterns for recognizing when, you know, when a couple might be destined for divorce or breakup, and, you know, the Gottman signs and some of that stuff. But I mean, in terms of like divorce lawyer signs, I mean, when my wife and I are out with another couple, you know, when we hear that kind of like subtle, sometimes even put down, we're like, oh boy, what's going to happen with this couple? And a couple of people have went on to get divorced. Some are still in the relationship because it can be hard to leave. But
very. But yeah, so and you felt probably very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
That was not a place where you wanted to be. And so I would imagine maybe you didn't socialize with them again. I see this.
Yeah.
Right.
It's pretty much spot on. We don't want to be part of that. I mean, we felt for the female, it was a female each time in the relationship. Well, actually, there was one male that we knew, but we're like, we don't want to be around this. Like,
Exactly. And so when you think about this, that was not an isolated incident for this couple.
Yeah.
And this creates more isolation. And what will happen is, to go even further with that example, is she'll say, for example, they don't want to see us again. And I think it's because of the way you behave. And then he'll say, you see, these people, they're not really our friends, and I don't like them anyway, which only creates more isolation and also dependency on the abuser.
And so say for that person, that wife in our example, she gets to the point of where she's thinking, you know what, I've had enough. Maybe she's empowered by your practice or a meeting with somebody in mind. How does this gaslighting start to come out in the process of separating from, you know, a controlling, toxic person, maybe one of the narcissists? Like how does this show up when the relationship starts to be towards the end?
I think that what happens is that you'll see that there's more discrediting of her mental health and of her decision making toward other people. So he'll start to try to contact her attorney. I don't know if you've had that happen, saying that she doesn't know what she's talking about, threatening to take the kids and claim that she's an unfit mother. I think that's a really big fear. A lot of my clients who are going through this, their partners have made threats to take away the kids or to report them to DCF. And what I try to explain is, and you know this as an attorney, it's incredibly hard to prevent a parent from seeing their children. I mean, there has to be such documented severe abuse for that to happen. However, you put yourself in the mind of that woman who's been told sometimes 10, 15, 25 years, okay, that they don't know what they're talking about, that they're stupid, they're questioning their sense of reality, their own judgment, and they're just petrified.
It's amazing to see that. Amazing and terrible, I guess, as we were kind of talking before we hit record on this. And I mean, I'll just say as a public service announcement, I mean, there's no guarantees in anything in life, but I've seen a lot of things as a divorce lawyer. I've never seen a good, safe mother lose her children or end up in jail or be taken to the cleaners, whatever, and left penniless. It's the stuff, it's judges have discretion, but you know, they only have so much. It's almost like with some of these people. I tell people this, you know, when I hear, you know, maybe a history of gaslighting in consultations, and to our clients, it's almost like every day is opposite day. If he's saying that about you, it may very well be, you know, what's going to happen to him. And it's still hard to ignore that stuff. So unless you're working, you know, we tell our people, be working with a very good therapist throughout the process, not for couples counseling, but just to manage the situational anxiety and triggers and stay grounded. And, you know, which I guess we'll get to a little bit, but you know, it's some of this stuff, it's just so vile and wrong, but easy to believe when you've been almost indoctrinated into believing it.
Correct. And one of the saddest things that I've seen in my years of practice, you mentioned judges, police officers, you know, they protect our community. I have a lot of respect. However, if they're not educated regarding domestic abuse, they've arrested the wrong person. I had a client who was pushed and shoved by her partner. She went to take a bath. She just had given birth. He called the police and he scratched himself, called the police, accused her of hurting him, and she was arrested. I've seen this. And so you can just imagine being her, not trusting the system, not trusting herself. It's incredibly sad. It's incredibly sad. But I would like to add, with the right support, the right attorney, the right therapist, you can overcome and you can recover from this. And one of the greatest joys for me as a professional and even as a person is to watch a woman go from a caterpillar to a butterfly. It's an amazing transformation, and it can happen.
I'll tell you, and it can be it's my wife and I talk about this frequently. It's because some people say, oh, how can you be a divorce lawyer? That's so ugly. You know, sometimes it is, but you know, we do see it differently, and just maybe it's our core beliefs of, you know, we don't think you should get divorced and unless you try to improve the relationship and there's a good reason for it. But when there is a good reason, and including in these toxic relationships, you can really have somebody, if they take the time to learn about what's happened to them. Sometimes that takes a lot of learning and understanding childhood and stuff like that, but they can come out of the situation with time if they put in the work and do the legal process right, or at least even half right. They can be such a different person, and it is amazing to see for them, and not just for them, but for the people they may be able to help, or if they have children, you know, the children and their children's children. It can be hard, but it's the transfer, caterpillar to butterfly. I think beautiful butterfly couldn't be put better.
Yes. And lastly, I always tell women who are facing this and they're so scared and they say, what if I regret this? What if this is the wrong decision? And I say, I have never met, and I can say that unequivocally, I've never met a woman who left an abusive relationship that regretted it. They might be in a different financial situation. That's a huge part of it. Okay. And they may be living in a small apartment, but it's theirs. And you have peace in your life. So
to not be able to be walking on eggshells, to know you control your own destiny. I think it's a life-changing thing. And when you get to that, and there might be certain aspects that are different, but I almost equate it to, you know, having my own law firm. And I mean, there's certain things that are different than when I I was an employee of one, but I know I determine what happens in my day and my success, and that really empowers me to be a happier person. Don't get me wrong, I had great law partners before, but it's a change of life. And I guess to where if somebody's listening to this and there's people that might be listening for themselves, and there might be mothers, sisters, friends, neighbors that are maybe listening because they're thinking of somebody else they care about. What are the red flags that gaslighting might be happening in a relationship? It might be a toxic type of relationship. How
Sure.
does this show up in everyday life?
So thank you for asking that. Like, what are some red flags that someone might be gaslit? So when someone is constantly doubting themselves, I don't know if you've met people who constantly say, well, I'm just not sure. I
Absolutely.
don't know. They're apologizing excessively for things that they shouldn't be. They didn't do anything wrong. They're insecure. They're confused, and they have a lot of self-doubt, and they're questioning their memory and whether or not they have the capacity to really remember what actually happened. So someone who's apologizing a lot and very insecure, the partner denies and rewrites the past events. So when you're talking to a friend, for example, and they say, this such and such happened, and when I talked to him, like, for example, we got into a fight and he slammed the door and he blocked me from leaving the house, et cetera, et cetera. And when I talked to him, he said it never happened. Am I crazy? When you hear someone say to you, am I crazy? That is a huge red flag. I hear this
Yeah.
very frequently in therapy. So friends and family begin to withdraw when they hear that she's unstable and irrational. So the gaslighter might be talking to friends and family about how she is losing her mind, she's going crazy, and then they will withdraw. So if you notice a sense of withdrawal, if you notice, like we talked about before, some of this is repetitive, but if you notice when you're out in public with a couple and he is undermining her, discrediting her, saying disparaging things about her, that could also be a red flag. And if she's feeling trapped and dependent, that is a red flag. And this could be also a red flag that someone's being abused.
Yeah.
I remember being with a friend, a longtime friend, and it was very hard for her to get out. It was very hard for her to make a date, go to lunch. And when we would be at lunch, if the phone rang, she would jump and she would look. And if it was her partner, she would get incredibly nervous. And that's also a red flag. Why would you be nervous? Why is that something that would need to make you nervous? So
It's like I've found it interesting that this is not just a thing that happens with uneducated people, and just from what I've seen, there are plenty of people, women, men also, that they have college degrees. They're doctors, lawyers, astronauts, so to speak, type people married to somebody else like that, very high performing individuals. And this happens in those relationships. And just what I have found, especially in the people I've seen this happening to in just my wife and I's personal life, that sometimes the people that are perpetuating, this abuse, which is what it is, are very convincing people, like guys, like well-spoken, successful, individuals with great reputations in the community or their church. And it's sometimes hard to believe that that's going on with the image that some of these people have.
Such an important point, Chris, that you're bringing out, which is you don't see when you meet these guys in person, they are very charming. They are incredibly nice. Everyone loves them. That is their outside persona. And actually, that's very important to a narcissist, that they're very well liked. And so it's hard for you to really believe that this is happening. But Ted Bundy was a charmer, okay?
Yeah.
So please. And actually, someone who is smart, good looking, successful, those are the worst kind. I mean, they really believe that they can do no wrong and have, a narcissist, believing that they define reality and they're so grandiose. But one of the things that I want also, again, to remember, you see a woman, a professional woman who has everything going for her. She's gorgeous, she's smart, she has a great career. You wonder, why is she staying? I want you to remember, this happens gradually. Gaslighting and all types of other abuse, it happens very slowly, and usually after someone is married. So, they can be on their best behavior through the courtship, through the dating process. What you'll find is these types of partners want to really lock you in quickly.
Mm-hmm.
So they're love bombing you with you're the most wonderful woman I've ever met. You're my soulmate, getting engaged quickly, moving quickly. And then after they're married, this begins to be so subtle. But these women are incredibly in love with their husbands, and they don't want to get divorced. They want the behavior to change. And it takes a long time for a woman to really accept that there's no changing here. Nothing is going to change. It can take a woman up to 7 years to finally leave. 7 times. A woman will leave 7 times and come back, or contemplate leaving seriously and go back to 7 times. So it's complicated. It is gradual. And it just has devastating psychological effects.
And, and we'll talk about the processing all of this a little bit, but just for somebody that's listening, I mean, how does being gaslit affect a person? I know it's not good, but I know you can explain it better than I can. Like, what's the damage done by this stuff? Is it just more than words?
Well, thanks for asking, what damage can be done to someone who's being gaslit and being abused. The most common with gaslighting is the chronic self-doubt and confusion, questioning your own judgment, questioning your decision making, unable to make a decision. So the constant self-doubt, increased levels of anxiety, increased levels of depression, and increased levels of substance abuse. Those are extremely common. Loss of self-esteem, no sense of self-worth, no sense of self-esteem. And chronic apologizing, like I had mentioned, always apologizing, saying disparaging things about themselves. For example, oh God, I know this is so stupid. I'm so stupid. I'm so, fill in the blank. As someone who speaks badly about themselves openly, that can be an effect. And of course, increased dependence on the gaslighter, on their abuser, because they're so isolated. And over time, they meaning the abuser, becomes the authority.
Well, I'll tell you, in hearing that, I know neither of us are medical doctors, but I mean, just for myself in the past year, my wife and I, we've kind of been on a health journey. We realized, we got to set good examples for our kids, and, we're not getting any younger. And as we've been learning about the foods we eat, exercise, not eating processed foods, and having, being in a constant state of inflammation in the body, as we've been digesting all of these health books, I've also read a lot into, when you're in a constant state of stress, you have more cortisol in the body, and really it can be a contributor to your body being in a constant state of immune response, which does no good for your general health either. And I just kind of wonder at times, again, I'm not a doctor, I see, I feel like a high incidence of my clients that are in these types of relationships that also report these vague kind of neurological conditions, like Quasimodo disease, and I'm not thinking of it at the moment, but
it's fibromyalgia.
That's exactly the one I'm thinking of, and it's more recently it's clicked for me. There's probably some connection to the way you feel when you're in these relationships and your health too.
Absolutely, I see that as well. Major health problems, maybe back problems, stomach problems, Crohn's disease, all sorts of other physical ailments, which of course are brought on by stress, weight problems. And these women who are in these marriages, they have very high expectations. Their partners are usually very demanding, and usually they're juggling a ton of things, and including children, including a job. Self-care is zero. I mean, it is zero. They make no time for themselves. They have absolutely no ability to set a boundary, and it just causes not only psychological illness, but of course, like you said, physical for sure.
Oh, it's just for the people listening to this. Of course, consult your doctor, but it's to me,
Mhm.
I see a trend in this stuff that to me, it's more like causation, not correlation. At least that's my belief with this stuff. So, in my
Mhm.
mind, yeah, gaslighting can make you sick. I don't know.
Yeah.
Let somebody do a study on that. But when it comes to people going through this, why is it so hard to realize this is happening to you? I
Mhm.
feel like some
Mhm.
of this
Mhm.
stuff when I meet with the people, it's like, what would you say if you told your girlfriends this? Like, what would you say to them? And then sometimes they snap out of it. Why is it so hard to recognize this might be happening to yourself if you're in one of these relationships?
Because, thank you for asking, why is it so hard to recognize this? Why is it so hard to leave? Because you've been told for years and years and years and years that you're wrong, that this is not happening. They become the authority. Okay. One of the things that I find very common when you're dealing with a woman who's being gaslit or and abused, because if gaslighting is happening, there's other forms of
Yeah,
emotional abuse and verbal abuse
definitely.
that are happening. We can't forget that, as well as possible physical abuse. And what I find is that when there's the absence of physical abuse, that is often what a woman will fall back on. Well, he's not
Yep.
hitting me.
Uh-huh.
Well, he hasn't hit me. And or he hasn't cheated. What does that mean? That all of this is okay? But they sort of use that then as an excuse. And with the physical abuse, I've had examples where a woman will, the husband will prevent the wife from leaving the house. Like, let's say, because one of the things that a therapist will say is, you don't have to participate and engage in the abuse. I want you to leave the room. I want you to leave. And if he's blocking her from leaving and preventing her from leaving,
Hmm.
if he throws something at her or around her. I also had an example of a husband who would keep his wife up all night by playing music, by keeping the lights on, by yelling at her. So sleep deprivation, all of that is physical abuse. Okay.
Yeah.
I just wanted to point that out. So
Actually recognize now, finally, the Florida legislature caught up to some of that. They actually have started to build
yes.
that into the law now that this stuff can be considered domestic violence, just as a aside. But even the law is caught up to that,
Right. Right.
finally.
It happens gradually, like I said. So it just kind of creeps up on you. And I want you to know the husband, the gaslighter, is exploiting the love and trust of their partner. So all of this is happening with someone they love and they trust. They've built a life with, they have kids with, maybe they have a business together. Okay. Their lives are so entangled that they just feel really trapped. A lot of a gaslighter will disguise concern and say, I'm just concerned about you. I'm just worried about you. You don't seem well. You're losing your mind, or sort of joke in a way that's insulting. So it's very confusing and they're not sure. And just the nature of gaslighting, by making someone question their own sanity and their own reality, it's very hard to make a decision. So think of the woman having to decide to leave her marriage. It's just very, very overwhelming, especially when they're doubting themselves. There's also a lot of shame involved. When you're in a relationship, when you're being gaslit and being abused, you're so embarrassed and so ashamed. And that really keeps you quiet. It keeps you isolated, stops you from reaching out to supports, which is another reason why you don't leave. And there's also trauma bonding. So what happens is
Yeah.
they're not always like this. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about that. Okay,
Yeah.
they're not constantly gaslighting. There are periods of happiness or joy. I mean, I don't know if I'd go that far, but
Maybe
they'll
relative
breadcrumb.
joy compared, not terrible.
Correct. Yes, and
It's
not
that's the thing
terrible.
that most people are like, oh, it's actually okay some of the time. And then when you really dig down, if you do, it may
Yes,
not be great. It's not great at all. It's just not awful.
they're
Like
just
you,
not
you
being
can
abused.
this transition from, caterpillar to butterfly, like we can become the beautiful butterfly in life and not just live in a life that's meh at best. So,
Absolutely. So their perception is distorted, and the husband will breadcrumb and do something nice, and I'll hear from my clients, he actually was helpful this weekend, and they get on their best behavior, And then, it's a cycle. Speaking of the cycle abuse, I'd like to take an opportunity to explain what that is.
Yeah, I think that would be very good. And I think this might maybe help. Like, look, no relationship is perfect. Like, you might have a husband or wife
Yeah.
that slips up every now and again. But there's a difference between that and a chronically abusive
Yeah.
relationship that does follow the cycle. I think that would be great to explain here.
I'm happy to do that. I used to give lectures about domestic abuse to the community, to police officers, to different audiences. And when I would explain what abuse is, I would see everyone's eyes sort of go, "Oh my goodness," And I know what they're thinking. They're thinking, "I really called my husband a bad name yesterday," or "I really wasn't nice to my wife a few months ago. I'm really feeling bad about that." Look, no one's perfect. There will be
Yeah,
abusive moments in marriages. There will be. But
yeah,
what makes a marriage an abusive marriage is when there's a cycle and there's a repetitive nature to the abuse. So what usually happens is there's a honeymoon period. And that honeymoon period is good. Things are good, or they're not bad. And things seem pretty calm. And the wife will think, "Oh, maybe he's changed. Maybe things are going to get better." And then there is a tension building period where he begins to be a bit prickly, getting angry more frequently, and you begin to walk on eggshells. And it's that period of uh-oh. And then there's a crisis period where there will be an event, something will happen, there'll be an argument, etc., and a period of more severe abuse. In the tension building period, there may be some gaslighting, there's verbal abuse, etc., giving the silent treatment, and then there's an explosive thing. And after that, either he will apologize and bring flowers and it'll never happen again, I'm sorry, or there is no acknowledgement. And that's more common, I find, in my practice, where there's just no acknowledgement at all of what happened, not taking responsibility at all. And then that cycle repeats itself. Now, each relationship is different. This cycle could go on every day. It could go
yeah.
every week, every month, every 6 months, but it is definitely a pattern to be recognized.
It's interesting, and it's the pattern I heard it the first time, but then when I saw it manifest several other times, it was just terrible to see, but interesting to see the reoccurrence. I don't know if you ever had clients who might go through this type of relationship, and then there's a period of silent treatment that mixes in. It seems like the times I've heard about it the most usually happen over the holidays, and and when I hear about it, usually I'll ask, has this happened before, to where your husband or wife hasn't spoken to you days, weeks, months? And almost always the answer is yes. And it's a repeating thing.
One thing I hear a lot is a victim will say, "He has not spoken to me for weeks and weeks and weeks," and that is a form of abuse. That is a form of abuse.
So we're not just talking about problems without solutions. I think both of us,
Yep.
kind of the real passion with this stuff is the how do we fix this part of the conversation, which is what I'm really excited to get into. And just like there's cycles of abuse, I think there's cycles of recognition and change. It's almost similar to a grieving cycle, I think sometimes. But for somebody that's in these initial stages of processing, maybe they're in a relationship to where they're being treated poorly, they're being gaslit. Some of this stuff, we're talking about is they're realizing this is my life. Like, what are some things they can start doing now to get some quick wins, to start feeling better, or at least a little bit less awful each day?
Yeah.
Maybe, let's say, to turn into a butterfly. Let's not go for mediocre here.
Yes. So my first step is to acknowledge that this is happening and really be honest with yourself that this is actually occurring in your relationship. And right now we're in a good place because social media has created a whole community of people who are speaking about domestic abuse, domestic violence, gaslighting, narcissistic abuse, where you can follow different social media influencers, different psychiatrists, therapists, who will speak to this like we're speaking now and create content that's educational, psychoeducational.
Yep.
Educate yourself, learn more about this so you don't feel alone. Okay, so you don't feel as isolated. Acknowledge what's happening and rebuild your own reality. Start journaling. Start journaling what was said, how, what happened, date it. So if you're questioned, if history is being rewritten by your partner, you'll be able to look back and say, you know what? I am right. I did say this and I did say that.
And I'll tell you what I think has been something you may or may not, tell clients this, but I've had plenty of clients come and play recordings for me because their therapist told them, hey, record what's happening. By the way, in Florida, you have to record with the consent of the other person. My clients are doing that, and we're not suggesting do anything illegal, but they do that, and then they hear what happened, and they're like, oh my goodness. This is what's going on.
Yes, that happens a lot. Now, you may not be able to, I'm not sure about the law, I tell my clients to record the incident just for their own benefit.
Yes.
And I've had clients save these recordings, telephone calls, save text messages for years and years and years and years and years, because they need reminding. This is happening. This is what was said. And a lot of people use denial, as a coping mechanism in order to avoid. I don't want to deal with it. I just want to go away. He's okay right now. It's not going to happen again. So these recording and this journaling can really, help.
I've definitely seen that, and even in the cycles, ideally, if some of this stuff is happening, it's something maybe the person is not, an abuser, and with the right therapy can change. I think it can get pretty hard when you're in a spot where it's to the level we're discussing of this stuff. But so if you're taking this journal and you're making note of what's happening with actual proof, then I've found for my clients that do that when they're in the divorce process, it's much easier in the beginning stages to kind of come up with a real vision statement for themselves of why what am I doing this to stop? Why am I getting divorced? And then if it does get hard in the divorce process, it can help, especially with the help of a really good therapist, to go back and look at some of that stuff and be reminded of, why am I doing this? What is what I'm trying to get away from and not have in my life anymore? And I think that, I know there's a couple of other pieces of advice you have here for somebody in the early stages of recognizing this, but that can be really, really important.
Absolutely. I completely agree. As well as setting boundaries, even if they're small. Start to set boundaries. Start to take care of yourself. Practice some self-care. Practice saying no when you need to. Setting boundaries. It's a very trendy term.
Yeah.
But by setting a boundary and following through with it, that builds self-esteem. So what we're trying to do is help people realize that, give them that sense of self back. And by setting boundaries and realizing, oh, I can say no to, and it may not be with their abuser, but a lot of people pleasers are in this position, wanting to say yes to everything. Will you take care of my kid? Will you watch my dog? Yeah, oh, sure. Because they don't want someone to be angry with them.
Yeah.
And then they start saying no and realize, oh, people still like me after that.
Yep.
I can say no, and the sky is not going to fall in, and it's not going to be a disaster. Practice self-compassion. You have to not beat yourself up. You have to fight the shame. You got into this relationship because you loved this person and you have done the best that you can thus far, and it's not going to work, and it's okay, and you're going to be okay. Practicing cognitive behavioral techniques to change the way you're thinking. These women are so used to speaking badly about themselves to themselves. Their neural pathways are used to firing in that direction. And we need to work really hard at helping them change that, giving themselves self-affirmation, and reaching out to those trusted friends and family, building a support group for yourself, and maybe even finding professional support group. And please seek treatment. Please seek the help of a therapist, because it's really life-changing in these types of situations.
That's something I wanted to talk to you about, because it's One thing I think that's really cool with the advances of technology, social media, now you got like GPT therapists essentially. There's a lot of information out there, which is great because information builds awareness and, constant
Mhm.
awareness hopefully is societal change, which I think we'd both love to see on this stuff. But what's the difference for somebody that's in one of these relationships, learning, but working with a professional? What is being in your practice or somebody that
Mhm.
really understands this stuff like you, how does that help somebody differently than just consuming content on these subjects?
Well, it creates a safe space for you to share your personal experiences and gain validation that you are not crazy. Okay. So it's really someone who's on your side and who's there to listen and who's going to help you rebuild your self-trust and your self-confidence. You'll also be provided with psychoeducation that is specific to you and to your situation. You'll be able to learn the patterns and see the patterns more clearly, very specifically in your relationship. And also taking a look at yourself. I mean, there are reasons why people stay longer in these relationships,
Mhm.
and it usually goes back to childhood
Yep.
and what they, how they grew up and what they learned. And so really helping them connect the dots, I like to say, from, oh, I see, I've stayed in this relationship. There's always many reasons. It's always
Yep.
complex. It's an onion. There's lots of layers, but oh, I see now my dad was abusive. And oh, I see, this feels comfortable to me on some level. And really being able to make those connections, I think is really important. Reframing the self-blame and the shame, like I said earlier, cognitively reframing those thoughts to more positive and stopping the blaming yourself. You're the victim.
Yeah.
You are the victim here. And there are reasons why you have been manipulated. And gaslighting is pretty complex. And again, makes you question your own judgment. So really rebuilding your own sense of self and judgment and believing in yourself is just some of the ways that a therapist, working with a therapist, can really help.
I mean, just in my view, because I see the clients or the caterpillar at closer to the
Mhm.
turning into the butterfly stage, hopefully. But just in dealing with high conflict divorce
Mhm.
for a living, which is always interesting. To me, the people who most
Mhm.
successfully complete the process, which, the divorce part, the legal part of it, to me, which I define as, with direction, being deliberate as soon as possible, and ideally on a state of mind trajectory to where by the time they get to me, they're seeing the bigger picture. And while the legal
Yeah.
stuff, can be annoying, sometimes stressful, especially with kids, they see it as it's
Mhm.
okay. This is the final necessary step to really get this stuff behind me. When I see a person with that mindset, it's they're generally going to be in a much better place, much quicker. And one of the keys to me of getting to that place, having successful divorce when you're in a relationship to where gaslighting might be there and probably a symptom of more deeper toxic relationship, is seeing a therapist and
Mhm.
changing your perception on what's happening, and starting the process of changing your outlook really on life before the divorce gets going. I think the
Yeah.
women and men who do that, in my view, have a far higher chance of successfully navigating things. So to me, I recommend it to anybody before divorce, but especially if you're in one of these relationships. And I mean, I think some people are still in this day and age resistant to therapy, thinking it's like kumbaya, tree hug and stuff. But
Mhm.
I imagine, Sarah, like you can tailor things to be very practical. It doesn't have to talk, be psychobabble, which can be helpful.
No. Mhm.
Practical life skills, a lot of this, isn't it?
Well, learning coping skills, journaling, mindfulness, how to cognitively reframe your thoughts, how to regulate, emotional regularity, grounding techniques. These are all things that you can learn through a therapist. You mentioned kids, and I think maybe we could maybe talk a little bit about that.
Yeah.
That is a real issue for many women that I talk to. They feel so guilty because they know this is affecting their children, because abuse happens in the home. And as much as a woman, and again, it can happen both ways. I've seen men that are abused, but for the sake of our conversation, we're going to say the woman is the victim here. They feel so guilty that the impact on the children, although that's a whole nother podcast for us, and they're in denial about the impact, and they feel so guilty, and that therapist can really help them understand that. And they don't want their kids to come from a broken home, but they just don't quite understand the psychological impact that this type of family can have on the kids. And it is much worse. This is my opinion. I don't have any studies that I can quote, but I will tell you, I think it is better for children to see their parents happy, living in peace, particularly their mother, and seeing that you don't have to be trapped in a relationship that's abusive. You don't have to do that. So that's another reason to see a therapist, is they can help you through that and process all of that. And how about just processing your feelings about this?
I would imagine there's a lot of people, like, if you start to really recognize this and say you've got twin daughters that are 12 years old, the pre-tweens, listening to the latest Sabrina Carpenter thing, and you have to be feeling, some people I would imagine, like a pretty big part of self-regret and shame for allowing yourself to be in that position. And that's like kind of like the stuff that therapists really help with.
Yes. And so that's also, really helping people process all of that in a safe environment is crucial to their recovery, and seeing that they will be okay. I mean, so many of these women can't really see a future outside of their husband, and helping them see that, creating a vision board. What do you want out of your life? That has never been something they ask themselves. I'll say, well, how do you see yourself in 5-10 years? And I get this look like, I have no idea, And so really helping them develop that for themselves is really important.
And it's interesting you said what you just said, because for, my team in my practice, if we don't have a client working with a therapist before the divorce starts, and some people just don't want to listen, or, that they have a perception that it's unaffordable, which I really don't believe at this point. There's somebody that can help just about everybody. But one of our triggers internally is when we ask our clients, like, what are your goals? Like, what do you want your ideal life to be like? And there's a lot of what we do, which is like legal advice. We do law stuff at the end of the day, but as part of like forming a divorce settlement, we want to know what our client, like, ideally in a perfect world would like. And when they can't answer that question, they don't even know where to start. We're like, you would benefit hugely from seeing somebody that can help you, like, maybe dream, or at least see something different for yourself than the constant, state of stress that you're in. And I know you're not a financial planner, you're not the lawyer, but in my experience, a really good practical therapist can help a lot with somebody being able to develop what do they want in their life, which is, to me, hugely important if you're considering relationship changes.
Yes. And helping them see, for a long time, maybe they've threatened divorce, and the spouse will say, you're going to get nothing.
Yep.
I am not giving you a cent. And what I try to explain, and I'm not a lawyer, and I tell them this, but that's not true. They can't get away with that. The laws in Florida state you have to split assets, etc. You live in a house, you own your home, you may have to sell the house. I know that'll be hard, but you'll have to split the profit of that. So really helping them, it's a form of brainwashing. That's what gaslighting is. It really is a form of brainwashing, and therapy can help rewrite the script and help them, undo the damage that has been done.
And to me, one of the many reasons to see a therapist is, like, the gaslighter, the abuser, like, in the divorce process, it's not like they all of a sudden get on their best behavior and stop. They amp it up. And maybe you could talk a little bit about what you see in your clients in the divorce process, what preview, because it's, in my personal view, when this stuff is coming, it's easier to see it for what it is. Like, what do these abusers do?
Yes, that's a really good question. What do these abusers do? So when they see their What do these abusers do when they see that their partner is getting the message and about to leave? That's really the most dangerous time for a person who's being abused, because they ramp up their techniques and their abuse tactics. So they realize they're losing control, which is again really what all of this is about, wanting to control another person. So they will become more abusive. They will threaten suicide.
Yep, I see that very much at the beginning.
Yep, they will threaten suicide. They'll threaten to take the kids. They'll threaten to, hide the money. And sometimes this does happen. They will hide money. They will destroy her property. So things amp up, and that is scary. That is really scary. So developing with your therapist a safety plan to where you have a bag packed with everything you need for you or you and your children, where you can get out of the house if you need to. I also talk to them about, prior to serving their spouse with paperwork, get yourself your own bank account, start preparing for this to happen. Again, developing the safety plan and relying on your trusted friends and family to provide you support if you need it. I mean, I've worked with women who have literally said goodbye to their husbands when they go to work, and he comes home and they're gone because it's that dangerous of a situation. Yep. That's an extreme case. And all of this that we're talking about, the ramping up and the escalation of the abuse and the gaslighting and discrediting her in public, maybe posting something on social media, all of this is frightening and a reason why they don't want to leave, and they're scared. I mean, who would want to go through this? And when I'm working with a client who's going through this, I say, look, this is going to be a long process, and it's really not going to end when the divorce is final, unfortunately, if you have children. Okay,
no,
that's a whole
that's
other
the reality, and it's
yeah.
But it's like I tell the people that I meet with a similar version of that. But the reality is, you have a decision to make at a certain point, and you can deal with the current situation, or you can separate from it. Separating from it, especially if younger kids, doesn't mean you're erasing history. There are going to be side effects of that, and maybe out of those two choices, not either choice that you're thrilled with, but one choice is going to be better than the other for basically everyone. And it's getting away from having your whole life and relationship intertwined in that without change. That's my personal view.
Chris, that is absolutely what I tell my clients. I say you have to pick the best of the worst scenario.
Yeah.
Okay, neither one is great. Living with your abusive husband, or divorcing and being, financially struggling, facing being alone. No one wants to be alone. Being a single parent, all of that. So that's not really pleasant either, but at least you will have your space that is yours, that is peaceful, that can represent what you want out of your life. That's an excellent point.
And that's just the first step of it. After eventually this stuff is mostly behind you, and every day is another opportunity for yourself and those that look up to you, depend on you, to continue to make your life better. And you can really be a much happier person without even getting into there is a world of healthy relationships out there. Not that it's probably should be the first focus of somebody getting out of this. You can even have friends that add to your life, enrich you, and make you feel better every day. And at the right time, a significant other that does the same. But if you don't find one, so what? It's better than somebody bringing you down. At least, I don't know, that's my process of philosophy.
Absolutely. I agree with you 100%. 100%.
When it comes to tactics for somebody, they built some awareness of what's going on. They've realized, it's unacceptable. Maybe they're documenting what's happening to kind of look to in the future. They've got a great therapist. They're starting the official divorce process. Just from your view as a therapist, what are the things that you think that our listeners should know if they're going to leave one of these relationships, in terms of the tactics to have going on as they're going through the actual divorce?
Sure. Document everything. Have a notebook, every interaction, every text message, everything. So you have it, which is also not only good for your attorney, but good for you in terms of, yes, this happened. Yes, this was said. limit direct contact, and if you can, go no contact. There's no reason why you need to be talking to them, engaging. Do not engage. Do not engage. Give short answers. When are you picking up Johnny from school? Send the answer. There's no need to get into anything. I would also recommend highly that all communication is done on the apps, the court monitors app. Then there's no confusion.
Nowadays, you can delete a text message. I mean, it's great when you make a typo, but they can like gaslight by text message because all of a sudden the message is gone now. I mean,
correct. Now, you're right. You're right. And this, a lot of the time I'll say, just block him. Just block him. But what if there's an emergency? What if there's an emergency with the kid? Then they can put it in the app, and you will check that app frequently. And unfortunately, believe me, if God forbid there is an emergency, a true emergency with your child, you'll find out about it.
You'll find out.
You'll get a call from the police. You'll get a call from the hospital. So please do not have contact. And part of that is you're not allowing yourself to be abused, which is going to increase your self-esteem. And it gives you a break. It's like detoxing. Leaving these types of relationships, it's like going through detox. You need that time away to be able to see things clearly. One of the things I recommend to women who are contemplating this is, well, what about a bit of a separation? What about just that? Within that, they're able to really see more clearly. It's like, looking out of a foggy window. And then when they create that space, they're seeing the light, okay? Giving yourself that space is really, really imperative. Lean on your support system. Lean on your friends. A lot of the time it's hard for these women to ask for help, but leaning on your support system, prioritizing your self-care and yourself and what you need, practice saying no, and finding a good therapist and professional who is knowledgeable in this area and who has an expertise. That's very, very important.
I think it's all outstanding advice, and I think the great therapist part of it is very important. And from my view, another really good reason to think about it is, and maybe there's some things that you don't want your friends or your family to hear, and your therapist, just like an attorney, but a therapist is the best person for this, is they have to keep the stuff confidential. And sometimes you might tell your friends and family about what's going on in your relationship, and then they see you not moving forward to get divorced, and it can create a dynamic that maybe you don't want to have in your life. So there's a lot of great reasons to see a really good therapist. And from my view, because I'm the tactician, I'm part of making people's lives better through the divorce law process as a law firm, but as the tactician of actually facilitating the legal part of this stuff, when it gets to that point, the therapist is going to have you, emotionally, practically, more prepared than if you don't have one. And when you get to the legal strategy or the legal part of this stuff, you got to have your head on straight. You have to be able to, and a great lawyer will be able to help you with this and tell you all this stuff, but you have to come up with a reason why you're doing it and a tactical plan through the court system that makes sense in light of the person you're dealing with and all the other factors at play. And if you can't have your head on straight for that, it's going to be so harder. You're going to be doubting things more throughout the process, as opposed to understanding why it's necessary and already working on the stuff that's coming after. And I think that makes all the difference. And to me, I think where I could talk for hours on how the divorces for this stuff go, but the reality is when you're in an abusive relationship, 85% of the time, what's going to end up happening is one of three things. One, you're going to go and you're going to have usually takes 6 months with these people that are abusive and drag their feet. But where most cases will resolve is they call it a mediation in Florida, or a substantial negotiation, of which the gaslighter will find a ridiculous reason to end, and then they will blame the ending or the lack of finishing on you. Same thing they do during the relationship. Same.
Of course.
Same, I would say a word, but we're not going to have profanity in this. Same nonsense. And then what they'll do outside the presence of your lawyer is they're going to come back for, I kind of call it the sneak attack. We tell our clients this is coming, so they see it for what it is, but they're going to push hard. Even if you're out of the home, even if you blocked them, they're going to find like if there's an emergency, you'll get a call. Like they'll find a way to get in touch with you at this point, and they're going to try to push the hell out of you, intimidate you into making poor decisions or staying in the relationship. And if you can develop the tools to, number one, understand that's coming, but really number two, understand that what is happening is gaslighting, it's abuse, it's just really desperation of the other person, and have the tools from a therapist to regulate in that situation, react. Of course, listen to your lawyer. But if you get through that and you don't capitulate, that is where that's the real negotiation in a lot of these difficult divorces. If you stop that, you'll usually settle your case. Every now and then it gets closer to trial, and which is a little bit more testing. You have a true narcissist or an expensive legal issue, every now and then you do have to have the capacity to go all the way through the court system, and we see that more frequently in these divorces. But the vast majority of people who are going to divorce one of these really, if they can survive a final gaslighting attempt as divorce settlement negotiations are going on, they're going to get out of it. So I think it's critical to build up to understanding this stuff and not having it affect you. And I don't know, I would keep going if we didn't move off of this, but
I understand. And one of the things I wanted to point out is that, just briefly, sometimes the narcissist, the abuser, the gaslighter will say, well, why don't we just go to a mediator then? Let's go to a mediator. No. You are in an abusive relationship. You cannot use a mediator, for the same reason that couples counseling is not recommended in abusive relationships. He's not negotiating with you now. What makes you think he's going to negotiate with you with a mediator? You need proper legal representation.
You have to, and it's sometimes so hard to understand that what you said is exactly true. You have to have a lawyer who understands this stuff, and sometimes it's hard to really feel that way or know that's what you should do, because the vast majority of people getting divorced, when you have a relationship that's just run its course, two good people that aren't fit for each other anymore, and they're separating, if their finances aren't exceptionally complicated, they don't always need attorneys. It's usually a good idea, but they don't need it. So you might have had friends and family that have, went and seen a mediator to divide, a house, a retirement account, and two kids they both love, and it was the best decision for them. But that may have not been an adversarial situation with somebody that might be a legitimate psychopath that's been your abuser, and it's two different types of divorces sometimes there. So Sarah, maybe you could talk a little bit about your actual practice, because you don't just sit here and do podcasts all day long on this stuff. This is what you do, and you have a team that helps people with this stuff. So tell me what's happening in your practice. Tell me about your team. How do you help people so that if they're listening to this, they can reach out to you if it's the right fit?
Sure. So we're Wellness Counseling Group. We have a team of 4. All of us have experience working with clients who are in abusive relationship, in relationships with narcissists. We have seen this, and we have the experience in order to really help you, either cope within that relationship, because, by the way, not all, many people stay in these relationships, and that's okay. Our goal as the therapist is not to say you have to get divorced, but either you want help through that divorce process, or let's help you manage this the best way that you can while keeping your sense of self. But all of us have experience with this. It's one of our expertise, as well as other expertise such as cancer and chronic illness, dealing with depression, anxiety, different trauma. We have a therapist who does EMDR work, and we do couples counseling, and we also have a therapist who speaks Spanish and Hebrew. So we have a lot to offer, and I'm sure that we could, help you make a good fit. If you're interested, you could call us at 561-320-2018 or wellnesscounselinggroup.org. You'll be able to see our services, and each of the therapists have a bio. And I would like to say we accept most insurance plans, which really may help with the cost that you were saying. Sometimes people feel that therapy is prohibited because of the cost, but we accept most major insurance plans.
And I mean, as I understand it and talking with you, it used to be to see a lawyer or see a therapist. You had to, if you're a working professional or a mother, you had to leave the house, you had to leave your office. But with your practice, all you have to have is a smartphone. Basically, you offer this is virtual stuff that you do. People don't even have to leave where they're at, right?
Yes, we are all virtual, which is very convenient for everyone. I've had clients who have sessions in their car because, of course, privacy can be an issue, especially in these relationships, with these abusive relationships. There's a lot of control, but you can do this literally from anywhere if you have a smartphone. So it's convenient and very accessible to everyone.
Sara, what's your best piece of advice that you have for somebody listening this recording who feels trapped in their relationship and is experiencing gaslighting? What's your one best piece of advice for that person?
Well, I would say you're not alone. There is help. You're not crazy. That is really what I want to emphasize. You're not crazy. This is not you. And please seek help if you can, because it'll help you become butterfly, go from the caterpillar to the butterfly. It is possible.
And if you can leave our listeners maybe on a final note with one thing about recognizing or overcoming gaslighting, what would that be?
If you find yourself doubting yourself, thinking you're crazy, then I want you to begin to educate yourself and zoom out and take a look at what's happening. If you had a friend tell you the things that are happening within your relationship, within your marriage, what would you say to them? And I think that says it all. You know what you would say to them. You would tell them that this is not okay, that this is abuse, and to get help. So you need to really heed your own advice and do something.
Well, Sara, I think this is all great advice, and I really greatly appreciate you taking the time out of your life, your therapy practice, to talk to me about all this stuff. And I really hope that for our listeners, this can sink in, make an impact, and if you're listening to this and are thinking of somebody that would really benefit from the help, I just really ask you to share this with them, share Sara's contact information with them. Sara, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.